Hello, hello. Happy Tuesday. It is power session time. We are ready to rock and roll. Got some really fun things to talk about today as we dive into the mind. We dive into thinking patterns. We dive into thought processes. Had an amazing opportunity to go to San Diego this last weekend, spending time with the likes of Brian Tracy, who just you sit next to. I was sitting by him at lunch and just felt like I was drowning in the value that he was spewing just nonstop. He's so clear, so practical. It was awesome. Hanging out with Sharon Lechter, who wrote Think and Grow Rich for Women, is the reason that Outwitting the Devil, one of my favorite books of all time, was able to make it to the public market. That's a book that Napoleon wrote, I think, back in 1919. And then the family never wanted the transcript to be published, especially his wife. If you read it, you'll know why. But it's really powerful, really, really interesting, even if you're not theological, even if you're not religious or anything like that, especially if you're not. It's just the principles about what we do to sabotage ourselves as human beings in that book are unreal. Dan Clark was there, who's just an unbelievable speaker. Been doing this for a long time. He was inducted into the National Speakers Association Hall of Fame in 2015 or in 2005, and just a tremendous human being. Been all over the world, dignitaries, presidents of the United States, major players in the entrepreneurial market. You name them, he's probably spoken for them and really developed relationships with them. So, and then Eric Swanson, who put on the event that I was at, who is the creator of Habitude Warrior, which is a really cool story about him meeting Jim Rohn once, because he was actually Brian Tracy's #1 guy. And so obviously got connected with quite a few people. They call him Mr. Awesome because that's what Les Brown called him. And so we figured might as well adopt that. If Les Brown's going to call you something, you should probably own that nickname. And he got an opportunity to meet Jim Rohn once and came up to Jim and was like, "Can I get you a cup of coffee or something?" And Jim just dove right into getting to know him in classic Jim Rohn fashion, wanted to connect with him, and said, "What do you do?" And he said, "Well, I'm Brian Tracy's #1 guy." I said, "Well, what do you really want to do?" And he's like, "You know what, I don't know." So he went away and really thought about it, really processed some things, and then came back and said, "I know what I want to do. I want to help people with their habits and their attitude," which were two of the most valuable things for Eric in his life and what allowed him to be as successful as he was. And from there was born the term Habitude, and then the Habitude Warrior Conference. I love the term warrior to that. It's a really critical piece of personal development, of improving yourself, because you think of a warrior and you think of someone who contends, someone who battles, someone who sacrifices and really pushes the line for a good cause. Because that's really what we're doing here in personal development. We're driving ourselves into principles that we learn, and we first learn them logically. We've got to get it past our first line of defense, which is, does that make sense? And if it makes sense, or at least we have the faith to assume that it will make sense because of the person that's teaching it to us or the results that they've had, once it moves beyond that makes sense, then it starts getting deeper. And the only way to take it deeper beyond that is to contend with it, is to battle with it, is to deal with it, to cope with it, very much like a warrior would. So I love the term. I love the conference. If I knew nothing more about Eric than the people he surrounds himself with, the people that will show up and serve the way they served there, I wouldn't need to know anything else about him. It was just phenomenal. It was fantastic. So anyway, really fun weekend, and it was in San Diego, which is where I was born. Still feels like home, no matter how long it's been or how young I was when I left. Going back again this weekend with my girls. Super excited for that, because we're right on the beach, which is that's my happy place. In fact, my mom, who's watching, actually got me this. So that's me right there. So anyway, caught up on the weekend, excited to have you all here. We want to dive a little bit further into our thinking patterns. And I want to emphasize again, and I'm going to do this quickly for those of you who haven't been on here before, but there are 3 dimensions of habits. And by now, hopefully, if you're have any experience in your own personal development or in this industry, hopefully you understand the power of habits. Hopefully you've read The Greatest Salesman in the World by Mandino. Okay, Habit Finder. We are the official stewards of the Mandino legacy. We are here to protect the scrolls and his work and carry it into the 21st century. And everything we do at Habit Finder is to be able to magnify that, to be able to take things deeper with the technology and the science and the mathematics we have available to us today, that just take what Og wrote about 50 years ago to an incredible, powerful, and even practical level. And in that book, and as we understand, those of us who have been working in personal development for more than a few hours in our life, that habits are critical. It's the baseline. Your habits determine everything. Your habits determine the actions you take, the emotions that you have to deal with, and your capacity for those. They determine your decisions, ultimately your results. So it's the core. It's what we want to be able to get to, and because if we can impact our habits, everything else falls into place. Now, it's important to understand there are 3 dimensions to habits, and we've talked about this several times. I just want a quick review, and also those of you who are here for the first time, you have your behavioral habits. That's what you do and what you don't do. Do you brush your teeth? Do you make your bed in the morning? Do you have a morning routine or experience? Do you, what are the good things you do? What are the bad things that you do? And how aware are you of that dimension? Then we have emotional habits, which is summed up pretty simple with one single word. Emotional habits are personalities. I love Dr. Joe Dispenza's definition of personality. It's simply the emotions we've memorized. And memorization is a form of habitual learning. And so we memorize and then we use over and over again to secure that memorization. We do that with our feelings. We do that with our emotions. And the ones that become kind of our go-to are what shape what we know today as our personality. Measuring that can be fantastic if you've never ventured into the world of self-awareness and what you're doing. So definitely highly recommend, if you've never taken a personality test before and you're new to personal development, that can be a great introductory step. But the challenge is both these realms are limited because they are dictated by something further upstream, And further upstream is your thinking habits, your thought processes, the way your mind processes information and value and what it's experiencing and what it shapes in terms of how you determine how you approach what you're experiencing and everything in between. Now, we made a decision almost 20 years ago that we were going to spend our time, our resources, and millions of dollars to create a technology and a coaching program that is designed around the thinking habits, which until the Habit Finder, we had no way of being able to measure the way that we can now. This proprietary tool, that is the name of the company, apropos because it's the name of the tool that we use, the Habit Finder Profile, gives us about 6 quadrillion variables of information in the way that you think. It actually lays out in as simple a form as we can, which looks similar to a personality test, but if you read it like a personality test, okay, it's going to be like missing a left-hand turn while running a marathon, and you're just going to start going the wrong direction for who knows how many miles. It is not a personality test, so there are words on there that if you look at them in that frame and in that context, you're leaving yourself wide open for misinterpretation, okay? And being able to work through those things. Stephen just asked a great question about what book is best for personality. I would say Emotional Intelligence. So I would read Emotional Intelligence. I think is a phenomenal book all around, but it really dives into being aware of how to use personality. Because one of the challenges I've got with personality is the same challenge I've got with behavior. Is it puts you in a box. It puts you in a limited space. Okay. Your feelings, your behavior, these things are oftentimes we create an extrinsic box of, and now we're given a very intelligent sounding title for it. Whether we're taking a Myers-Briggs or a DISC or an Enneagram or whatever the case is. And the challenge is then we take all of our habits emotionally and even our habits behaviorally, and we go, oh, see, that's why I am the way that I am, because I'm a 3 or I'm a red or I'm this Disney's princess or whatever it is. We take these personality tests and they create a box that, especially for people that are new to personal development, they just assume, well, that's my box. And now I've got to figure out what other people's boxes are so that I can talk to their box and communicate better with their box. The challenge is inside of each of those boxes, inside of the emotional memorization, the shell that we create. And most of us have about 5 to 7 iterations of our personality. The challenge is that inside of that is a priceless human being with intrinsic, in other words, infinite potential. As soon as we start saying I am anything, we've immediately begun the limitation, the damming of our potential, just like damming a river. We miss the opportunity to be able to go further, to become more. Now, I'm not saying that those are bad assessments. All I'm saying is that they can be phenomenal for learning a little bit more about how you naturally behave, or what your tendencies are emotionally or in personality, and how to be able to mitigate that a little bit more responsibly, a little bit more intelligently with someone else, kind of getting an idea of what theirs is. But as soon as we go into deep development, as soon as we go into the places that really sustain change, it's a tough thing to stand on because it is based off of a limited definition. Whereas by mathematical definition, a human being is intrinsic, is infinite, an Aleph index 1. It is infinite. In case you were wondering what the mathematical symbol for a human being is, the pricelessness, meaning the more you can learn about yourself, the more there is to learn about yourself. And so to say, I'm not a morning person, which is a common one that I hear quite a bit, that's surrendering to the behavioral dimension, okay? The behavioral dimension to say, well, I'm not this or I am this, both of which are limiting factors. Now, some of us say, I am this affirmationally and to proclaim it into the world. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We just want to be very aware in what we're talking about today. The reason why I'm elaborating on this is we're going to talk about getting to know ourselves, which is a really critical piece of personal development. The more aware we can become of ourselves, the more powerful we can become, the more potential we can create, the less need we'll have to defend or need to be right, or whatever the case may be. So Steve just asked, what's the best approach to the habit finder when we take it again? So we don't recommend that you take the habit finder more often than about every 6 months. So when you what we would recommend is going through one of our programs, whether with a coach or in a group with a coach, or we have a digital product coming out by the end of the year that I'm super excited about. And some of you follow me on social media have seen that we've been doing some film shoots lately, and now we're into editing, giving people a really affordable option to be able to get exposure. Because this is a foreign place for most of us. I mean, we all think constantly 50 to 80,000 conscious thoughts a day and a few million unconscious thoughts a day. But very few of us have ever intentionally gone into the realm of thought armed with the tools of how to actually shape it. Because so much of impacting your thought, which is that third dimension of habit, because your thoughts impact your emotional capacity, that impact your behavioral capacity, that impact your results, and each one grows exponentially. You improve your thinking even just a little bit, you improve your emotional capacity even more, you improve your behavioral capacity even more, and you impact your results even more. That's the kind of return we want. Okay, we don't want to just affect our behavior that then makes us feel a little bit better, but then as soon as we're not feeling better, it becomes nearly impossible to sustain the behavior if it's not already wired and supported by our thinking habits. I've heard Ed Milet call it our thermostat. Okay, we're set at a certain temperature, and if all we do is operate within the behavioral and the emotional, and many of us have operated with the behavioral and emotional and accidentally tipped the scales in thinking and saw progress in our lives. But how many of us have created progress in our life or had a really successful thing happen and go, wow, I feel like I did that on accident. I'm not quite sure how I duplicate that, and even start to get in our heads with limiting beliefs and all kinds of things about what created that and what we can do with that. Oftentimes it's because we tapped into the thinking habit accidentally, which over time, you want to play the law of averages. If you continue to beat your head against the wall of emotional and behavioral capacity, as Og said in scroll 3, if I persist, I will succeed. So you can persist through battling the emotional capacity and the behavioral capacity, but you're going to get a very limited return. I'd much rather put my investment of my time and my energy and my sacrifice and my surrender and everything else into thinking habits where the smallest deposits create massive returns downstream in terms of the results we want to create. So, but that's what we take on, and we want, going back to your question, Steve, we want people to be able to take the assessment, to be able to see the way they're currently thinking, meet with one of our consultants, one of our habit finder specialists for free to be able to find out about what thinking patterns, and most of them unconscious, and most of the methods to shift them are counterintuitive, meaning it's not what you would think it would be. And so that was one of the reasons for the digital course, is to expose people to that counterintuitive arena. Okay, it's like riding a bike and you turn right to go left and you turn left to go right. If you've ever seen that bike, and the gentleman who takes that around and speaks all over the world, it's really profound concept. But some of that can be really true to changing your thinking, which is why you get a huge return for small shifts, huge return in your results. But those returns, those shifts, require a tremendous amount of patience and a tremendous amount of self-awareness, which is critical. And so then we'd have you go through a program with us, with a coach, one-on-one, or with a group or a digital course. And then at the end of that, generally 6 months later, you would retake the habit finder and be able to see what was impacted by the way you change your thought, what was impacted in your behavior and in your emotional capacity, and how aware are you now of the way that things have shifted, and where you're going to want to focus on next. So about every 6 months, you log back into Habit Finder and retake that assessment. When you go through a program with us, we give you very specific instructions for retaking that, but they are critical to being in the program with us. So they're not instructions that I can give you on this live, because you're not in a coaching program with us that has a very distinct pattern and process to it. So if I were to give you the instructions of how to take it at the end of that, it would defeat the point. So, but you can continue to experience that tool and do the best you can with it. But those of you who are really ready to take things to the next level, we're excited to take you there. So let's shift gears really quick and talk about this behind me. Okay. Today I wanted to talk about the only way to truly get to know yourself, which is paramount, critical for being able to create the success we want. If we want to be more successful, it can be as simple as just becoming more aware of who you are. Now remember, who you are is intrinsic, goes on forever. But one of the greatest ways that we can learn more about ourselves is very similar to the way we can learn more about someone else, and that is to treat ourselves like a stranger. There is incredible power in being willing to surrender the fact that you don't know as much about yourself as you think you do. It can actually be an incredible experiment to challenge some of the assumptions that you've made about yourself. Now, those of us that find higher levels of enlightenment, emotional intelligence, likely have challenged the assumptions we've made about others, the assumptions we've made about life, but have we challenged the assumptions we've made about ourselves? As Mark Twain said, it is not what you don't know that will get you into trouble. It's what you think you know that just ain't so. So getting an opportunity to challenge some of those things. And there's a really interesting term that you will want to be very aware of as you explore this space. And it's this one right here. Okay. I've heard several people talk about not shoulding all over yourself. It's one of the quickest ways to be able to detach from the intrinsic discovery of who you are. Is we've been shaped and conditioned with so many shoulds in our lives. And there are some shoulds that are really important. You should be a kind person. Okay, you should be service oriented. You should love others. You should take care of your parents. You should. There are a lot of shoulds that are wonderful in our society and in our world, but when they start seeping into an intrinsic area in terms of our identity, it can shape a lot of things over years that we didn't even realize were conditioning us, and make it all more critical and all the more important to stop, check out for a second, and start visiting with ourselves, start exploring ourselves as if we had just met ourselves for the first time. One of the top strategists in the country I had an opportunity to work with at the Jack Welch Management Institute, and she talked about how every year she would erase every meeting in her calendar and then challenge everybody who booked those meetings to send her a proposal for why that meeting should get back on her calendar, why it still deserves time and energy, and to make sure that the point of it hadn't been lost. I love that idea. I love that concept, not because she's anti-meeting per se. There's a lot of time wasted in meetings in every industry. Okay, not used for what they should be used when you're actually in proximity to other human beings. But to be able to challenge people to make sure that the value, the focus, the reason, the motivation for the meeting is still intact and that it's still valuable. Because sometimes we start meetings and then get caught up in, we should have that meeting. We should continue to do that. It served us for a time, so why wouldn't it continue to serve us? And we get wrapped up in all these shoulds about our activities, about our preferences, about who we are, and we start limiting ourselves at a tremendous level. So borrowing from the strategist example, okay, Trish is her name, and getting the opportunity to step back and kind of temporarily take everything off the table in terms of what you prefer, okay, in terms of what you think you want and what you think you dream about. Not because I'm asking you to like total recall yourself, okay, but to really just kind of step back as an experiment and say, what if I didn't know myself at all? What questions would I want to ask myself? What things would I wonder about myself? To which I would highly recommend you take this conversation, this interview with yourself, to paper. It's called a journal. It's an incredible place that allows you to work through self-judgment, allows you to work through a lot of shoulds and a lot of filters that we create in our lives that limit our ability to truly connect with who we really are. Now, I'm not saying that who you really are is so far off from who you think you are because of the way you've been brainwashed by shoulds and all this different stuff. That's not what I'm implying at all. But oftentimes we get stuck somewhere in life. And it could be as simple as the littlest assumption we made about what we like, what we really want, what we're really doing this for, what it really takes to get us to move, which comes to actually this primary phrase right here. This is one of the reasons why it's so important to truly know yourself. Because I've heard so many clients tell me, I shouldn't have to, whatever. I shouldn't have to wake up every morning and have a 2-hour routine to have a wonderful day. I shouldn't have to bribe, my kids to do this to be able to get them to show respect, or I shouldn't have to, whatever, fill in the blank. I want you to think about some of the shouldn't have to's you've talked yourself out of in your life. I shouldn't have to write my intentions on Post-it notes and put it all over my bathroom mirror and all over my car. Which the extension of this is I shouldn't have to. I should just be able to. That's the other side of this coin. I shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't have to reward myself with this. I shouldn't have to shut off this in order to do this. I should just be able to do this. Well, step back and ask yourself, who are you to really know? You are, as Jordan Peterson says, one of the most complex things on planet Earth, and yet you can go weeks without even programming the clock on your microwave. Okay, I love that example, by the way. You're some of the most complex creatures on Earth, and yet you'll go weeks without even programming the clock on your microwave, which is really interesting to consider. Are we making assumptions about what we should be able to do that are unfair to ourselves? Because we've built an infrastructure of shoulds. Have we headed off in a direction in life that has been unnecessarily influenced by what we should pursue in our lives, what we should want and what we shouldn't? Or are we giving ourselves an opportunity to check in? And I consider these check-ins calibrations. It's like flying a plane. You're not, it's very subtle little calibrations to check in and not assume that you're still on the same track that you were a week ago, that you're still on the same track you were a year ago. Because a lot of people get caught up in the why, right? And we start defining ourselves around our why. But what happens if your why changes, but you've been conditioned to believe that it shouldn't? Or what even happens if your why was created with some unnecessary influence from what your why should be? Well, all the more critical to be checking in with yourself as if you were a stranger, as if you didn't know you. And this can be accomplished with a trusted friend. Say, hey, if you didn't know who I was, what questions would you want to know about me? Totally unfiltered, totally safe place. Now, the likelihood you've got that person is less likely. Even if it is a committed spouse, that's still really difficult because you're pinging off of their mirror neurons, and you're still considering their judgment or that they're just trying to be nice to you. So I would recommend that you have this conversation with yourself on paper. I would highly recommend that you learn to be able to download your mind and break through, get rid of the filters, the social conditioning that we've been taught about what we should and shouldn't say, what we should and shouldn't feel. There are so many thoughts going on right now that if you were able to release them on paper, simply by letting go of whether you should or should not think them, that would serve you tremendously and allow you to get to know yourself quite a bit. Because one of the critical pieces we run into with the habit finder is making it very clear that there is you and there are your thoughts. And those are two totally different things, you and your thoughts. And when we can get to know ourselves better, we become less defensive and less shoulding about the thoughts. They get to just be. They get to be something that teaches us, something that we're aware of, something that we can observe rather than something we are constantly consumed by. Why is this a critical habit? Why is this a critical part of self-discovery? Well, like I said earlier, we have 50 to 80,000 conscious thoughts a day, 1 to 2 million unconscious thoughts a day. But here's the kicker. Over 80% of those thoughts are the same thoughts you had the day before. They just keep going around and around and around, waiting for you to find a level of awareness to extract the one sliver of thought that is starting to get infected, and being able to remove that, and then seeing that increase your emotional capacity, and then seeing that increase your behavioral capacity, and then seeing that increase your results. So I challenge you. This is deep work. Okay, we talked about sales last week, which was pretty practical, but sales from the perspective of thinking habits and how other people think. Which is a really powerful way to sell, because if you get beyond the boxes of personality and beyond the boxes of behavioral tendency, you get to the core of human beings, and that's where we all find similar connection, and that's the connection that we teach. This week's going a little bit deeper into yourself, which means we're going to want to be armed with gratitude, and we're going to want to be armed with action. Anytime you go deep into yourself, if you want to belay, like rappelling, okay? Like you've got your belay so that if you were to slip, they take a slight pull on the rope so you don't fall to your death. Well, your belay for any deep work is always gratitude, being really clear about what you're grateful for, and being willing to take action with whatever you discover. Being able to move something forward, to do something, no matter how simple or confusing it might feel. Because the last thing you want to do is dive into the depths of you to get to know you, only to waste hours and hours of your day sitting on the front porch of your mind, shooting the BS with yourself, or hours and hours locked in your closet of your deep intrinsic mind, beating yourself up and succumbing to sabotaging dialogue. So gratitude and action are critical to go into this space. But I challenge you sometime over the next 2 weeks, okay, to pull out your journal and start writing things down as if you were interviewing yourself. Treating yourself like a stranger, challenging some of your assumptions, challenging your shoulds and your should nots, and see if you can't find just one little piece of yourself that you may have been making a poor assumption about. You unlock that, the impact that has over time and your emotional capacity, your behavioral capacity, and therefore your results, really exciting. You talk to people who have created massive success. There was no drop the mic, boom, overnight impact. You talk about turning points. There was no turning point. There was an infinite number of turning points. And so getting an opportunity to just learn a little bit more about yourself, if you'll trust that, it can make all the difference in what you are already doing. Now, if you're not doing anything, then we have a few different things to consider. In that case, you might just want to jump in the greatest sales in the world and start ingesting scroll 9 every day, until it gets to a point where when that voice that tells you to procrastinate, that voice that tells you you're stuck, that life sucks, gets bombarded by this loud, resonating, I will act now. Okay. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, trust me, you read that scroll 3 times a day for 30 days. I can't think of a better way to get unstuck, because suddenly your true voice, your I will act now voice, not your I'm confused, I'm afraid of rejection, I'm afraid of all kinds of crap that's an illusion and it just justifies my smaller existence. As soon as scroll 9 gets louder than that, that's when we start to make momentum and movement. So if you're already in action, go deeper, have this conversation with yourself. If you're not, dive into scroll 9 and then start having this conversation with yourself. So thanks everybody for being here. Hopefully these insights today were helpful to you. These come from our sessions we do with our clients, and just the own self-work that we do ourselves as habit finder coaches. This is a conversation I've been having with myself all weekend, and treating myself like a stranger, not like, oh, who are you? Okay, not like that, but like who are you? I'd really like to get to know you. I'd really like to challenge some of your assumptions. I'd really like to have you tell me more about that, which is one of the most powerful ways to communicate with others. Why not ask yourself to tell you more about that? Okay? Take it on, contend with it, deal with it, take it beyond the logic and into actual development of yourself. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Take care.